Welcome to the Run to the Hard podcast, where we're here to remind you that God doesn't promise us a life free from suffering, but he always brings healing and restoration on the other end. Our goal is to inspire you to face life's trials with courage and trust in God's plan. And oh yeah, run to the hard that God allows. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Run to the Hard podcast. Man, day is raw. It's real, especially on my end, because and we were talking about this before we hit record, but I actually have some family grief beginning to take place in our life. And my sister-in-law, she has had her third son in the hospital for I think it's day 57.
Man.
And he's been on life support since he was born. He was at a specialist since February 1st, which is, 90 days ago.
Yeah.
And they've been waiting for him to arrive. He arrived and he's been on life support. It's been a roller coaster up and down. And we've just been given the news that there's a very slim chance of him living. And so my wife flew out this morning to be with her in Florida. And it's just heavy, man. It's heavy. And, the perspective of this podcast has been, the freshness of your grief and me being able to kind of help you breathe that story out. And I think what's interesting is I'm in a very similar spot to a listener who might be listening in saying, like, how do I help my friend in grief? Yeah. Because the topic we're going to cover, and the topic that's so raw and real right now for her, is that she's got to say goodbye. And it's unthinkable. Yep. It feels cruel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Curtis, if you could just take me to the last day in the hospital with Michal. And I know she said goodbye to multiple parties, but just walk us through it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my heart goes out to your family. And, I've been following, it's interesting because I've been following your journey, and your wife's been posting and sharing what's going on as her sister is sharing and saying, please pray, we need a miracle. And all the memories of that journey are, coming full circle. And my heart goes out, and we've been prayed several times yesterday, last night, first thing this morning. And I know you and I were in constant communication, just, trying to encourage each other as much as we can. But man, isn't that interesting that this journey that you guys are on right now is in the middle of what we're trying to do on this podcast. And I tell you what, somebody out there needs it, I guess. I'm willing to keep going down this path, but just so everybody knows, there's a serious struggle for little baby's life right now, and we need to be in prayer for this family. Yeah, we've been going down this journey of, we got the news, shocking news that Michal has this disease. We get all of the doctor's information and tell us to go, plan for the worst. We go for our first cancer treatment. We're in the hospital. We end up in ICU. God gives us these amazing days, but first part of the week, couldn't ask my wife the question, hey, when do you want to turn the machines off? I just was like, I knew the question had to be asked, but nobody wanted to ask it. Does that make sense? Like, whew, she's like, well, I can't die on Quinny's birthday. I've got to last through Friday. And at some point I remember just a brief conversation of, well, let's do it on Saturday then. And I know we've talked about all that took place on Saturday and getting to see all the family members one by one coming in, saying their last goodbyes. But she lasted through the night. And I got to have these amazing, profound moments, about every hour through the whole night. But then Sunday morning, man, the prayer requests coming in, the text, the messages, they were unbelievable. And there were so many coming in. But Sunday morning, I had dozed off of all of all things. I've been up for almost 48 hours and I dozed off. My wife woke me up on Sunday morning in full voice. Hey. And I open my eyes and she's looking at me and she's in full voice and the sun's out. We've turned her bed so in case the sun came up, she could see it in the morning. And we're having a conversation. Like we're talking. And it dawns on me. I'm like, because the nurses had prepared me and said, usually there's this big jump. You'll know it. She said there'll be this extra energy, something, but you'll know. And I was like, oh my word. Like it's happening. My wife is in full voice. We're having a conversation. And I remember saying, hey, babe, you want me to call the kids and get them here? And she was like, no, they've said goodbye so many times. No, it's okay. And I remember she said, hey, my legs are killing me. Can you just rub my legs as we talk? And, those are kind of personal times that I won't share a lot about, but we had a good conversation. Nurse comes in and she's like, she sees this woman with her eyes wide open and she's carrying on a conversation. And the nurse kind of freaks out like, oh my word, like, do we need to call hospice or something? And I was like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It won't be long. And she hadn't been there. It was a new nurse. And we talked for a little bit longer. And finally she leans over and says, ooh, I don't feel so good. I was like, okay, is it time? Do you want your medicine? And she's like, yeah, you better give me my medicine. And so I hollered for the nurse. She comes in and she gives her another dose of heavy medicine. And Michael's out pretty quick. That's kind of how it went. That happened every 45 minutes all night long. She'd come to, we'd give her medicine. She'd come to. And I'd been up for so long. I told the nurse, I said, hey, I'm going to run down and get some coffee real quick. Will you promise to stand right here? Do not leave my wife. And she says, I promise. And so literally I run, I grab a cup of coffee. I don't even know if I got a sip in, but I run back to the room and there's 3 nurses and they're kind of hustling around the bed. And I was like, what happened? What happened? She said, and the nurse said, it's okay. We just had a little incident. We've taken care of it. It's okay. But then I noticed the other nurse had put her finger in the little pulse thing. And I looked up at the screen real quick and her pulse had just dropped. And she kind of gave me the nod and said, it's going to happen soon. And, I look back at that moment and I think, okay, I run to get coffee. What did I miss? And then I was like, I don't want to know. I thought to myself, maybe God spared me an incident that I didn't want to remember for the rest of my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I never asked. I didn't want to know because I was like, man, just maybe he spared me something that I just didn't need to see or know. And I remember I leaned in and put my head on her lap and, I kind of grabbed her hand and you could see, her breathing just kept getting shallower and less and they, it'd go 1, 2, 3 seconds and then 6 seconds and then 8 seconds. And I remember the nurses, I could see them out of my peripheral in the window. They gave me this moment on purpose. They weren't going to intrude. But I just kept saying over and over and over and over, like, it's okay, babe. It's okay. Go be with Jesus. Go be with Jesus. It's okay. It's okay. And I remember that last breath, and it's so vivid in my mind because you actually start counting, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. And then you feel yourself wanting to scream, breathe. But you can't because you know that she wants to be there. Even if I want her here. I remember she took her last breath and I remember saying out loud, Lord, please let heaven be real. Please let heaven be real. And I don't know what other people go through or feel, but that's the first time in my whole life. And I don't want to call it doubt. I just wanted some kind of assurance that everything I'd been taught, everything that I knew, everything that I'd read was real. And I don't know how long. Finally, her cancer doctor actually came in, hugged me, and put his arm around me. The other nurses came in. They kind of, I don't know what they did, but they obviously had to do some things. And the nurses that had been there all week long, she was the one who came in and told Michael how much she loved her and appreciated her. And thanks for being this amazing, amazing person for the hospital to see. She came in and she lifted Michael up enough and said, "Put your arms around her. Just hold her." I can't imagine having to do that job every day. These people do this every day. They work in ICU where they have to experience this on a daily basis and help loved ones deal with the grief of death. And I've thought about that a bunch of times thinking, man, I don't know. I had to start calling and texting family, and her parents were already on their way and the kids were on their way in. But I had those moments just a few moments by myself before anybody got there to just contemplate, heaven. The reality of it is there's really only three things that could happen, right? Everything we know is real. So there's a heaven or a hell. That's two. Or none of it's real and they don't go anywhere, right? There's really only three choices. That's it. It's not like death gives you this whole, barrage of answers and things that can happen. No, that's it. You believe in heaven or hell or nothing happens. And in that moment, you begin to think about the fact that hundreds and hundreds of hymns and songs have been written about heaven. And you remember the scriptures about heaven. You think about Jesus himself promised this place where he's going to go prepare a place for us. And death is ugly. Death is awful. And I've heard people talk about they just quietly fell asleep and, left this earth and went to heaven. And, I wish that was the case. The biology didn't work out that way. And so you have these memories, not like that, but you see death. And then you are confronted, face to face with your faith. I believe this is true. I believe this is fact. Jesus' promises are true. And, I choose to believe. And that's the journey. I remember the first few months, man, I struggled with that memory. I fought it. I struggled. I dreamed about it. But little by little, God has given me more peace and comfort in knowing that my wife is in heaven. And he's the only one that can give you that kind of peace and understanding, and know that I can fully trust in him and fully trust his word and fully trust the promise of heaven. My wife, she couldn't wait to go. To watch her eyes and light up when people would come in the room and she'd say, "I'm going to heaven." Like, how neat is that? I'm going to see Jesus. Whew. Yeah. So having those memories of even her and her excitement about going, those are helpful. They're needed,
Yeah.
Um,
So you mentioned that when Michael took her last breath, you wondering like, Lord, is this real? Right.
Yeah.
And you reference the scriptures where Jesus does say like, look, I prepare a place for you. But what's so interesting about what you're saying, Curtis, is that scripture does not spend that much time on heaven.
Mm-mm.
And so you have a very valid question in your head, right? And I'm thinking of scriptures like in Deuteronomy where it says things belong to the Lord.
Right.
Right. And he'll only reveal the things that he wants to reveal to us. And while Jesus revealed heaven and its glory in certain ways, there's also scripture that references that, Paul talks about how heaven was so glorious. The glimpse of heaven that he got was so glorious that he felt it was sinful to even talk about it because he would be boasting.
Right.
And so we could look at this from the perspective of saying, man, why doesn't God give us enough about heaven for that assurance?
Yeah.
But we see in the scriptures when we really dive in, like it's unspeakable,
Right.
Unspeakable joy because of the close proximity to God. And I know you've mentioned a few times, we're praying to God, but Michael literally has his presence in his ear. So walk me back to Michael in that burst of energy. Was she aware that this burst of energy was, close to what would be her final moments on earth?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
You guys didn't have a conversation about it?
No, it was just more intimate. Man, I love you.
Yeah.
So proud of you. You've done this so well. Yeah, it was just soaking her in, man. She was wide awake for a few minutes, and we were hanging out. Like, it was good. Felt like God gave me that moment,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother-in-law was a hospice nurse, and she always said that usually people who were, maybe even older before they passed away, it would either be that they would have a day like that, or they would have a day where they tapped out of it to the point. Well, I'll actually never forget, Curtis, a grandmother was passing away, and she, like, everyone was telling me like she was incoherent and couldn't speak. We all came to visit her in one day. And dude, this whole entire day, God gave us that gift.
Wow.
Of being able to like just snap out of it and speak to us. And man, let me tell you this real fast. I had such a gift that day. I had a last embrace of my grandmother, and it was such a personal moment, but it was so awesome because I asked her, I was like, Grandma, I mean, you know Jesus, right? Like just covering all our bases here.
Yeah.
And she pulled me in, and she was like, I can't wait to be with Jesus. And she said that when I walked in that day, which like, oh dude, she said that when I walked in that day, me and my family, that she felt like this instant peace, and just felt like God was telling her like, you're going to see him. One day in eternity.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Dude, having that last embrace with her when everyone was saying she was so incoherent, and then getting in the car and leaving her. And it was such an incredible gift. And you got to wonder if that's just God's grace.
Sure. Yeah.
In these circumstances to give us those last moments of energy and clarity.
Yeah, I felt like the entire 10 days that we had Michael in ICU was this amazing gift. It's why you and I are doing this. Like she witnessed and gave testimony to everybody, the hospital staff and her family and kids. And, she gave us some things that were eternal. She gave us some perspective. Like, it was so good. So what motivates me to do any of this is seeing my wife, faced with the hardest things that anybody's ever going to be faced with, but face it fearlessly. And so in love with Jesus. Like, this is okay. Like, this is what's going to happen to all of us. And I'm ready and I'm prepared. And I want all of you to be ready. Like, it was truly a gift. It really was. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a few times that, Michael gave us the blueprint for grief and hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know she was such a light in the hospital, but expand on her attitude when she knew what was happening, man.
I mean, when we got the news, it was awful, like, for everybody. But there was definitely, I could definitely see the switch. When the switch was flipped, like, okay, this is real. This is happening. You went into teacher mode, to mom mode, to, I want my kids to know that this is okay, that these things are going to happen to us in life. And, she talked about, I've told people before, I've even written posts about this, that we've got to prepare our kids for life. Stop sheltering them. We live in the bicycle helmet world. We protect our kids from everything. And I think the best thing, I'm going to talk to you dads, best thing is to let boys go, jump out of trees and ride bikes without helmets, and get them dirt bikes and let them crash a few times. And every kid needs to break a bone. I just think they do. I think every kid needs to break a bone. Like, I just do. They need to experience.
Right. Yeah.
They need to experience hard things, hurt. They need to see some real stuff. Like, Michael was not afraid of that. She raised her kids that way. I mean, even to the point where there were some things that I saw made me even nervous. And I've raised some boys, right? So I went to their house one time and I saw the boys jumping off the top of the shed onto the trampoline.
Let's go.
And I was like, okay. Like, and it's not even phasing her. She looks out the window and says, "Oh, look what the kids are doing," and blah, blah, blah. And one time I saw Edward jumping up. He was trying to do like this running, jumping, shooting a bow and arrow at a box. And he wanted mom to video record it and do it in slow-mo so it would look really cool.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is super cool, but let's make sure the little kids go in the house when you're
right
jumping in the air, shooting a bow and arrow at a box in case, it ricochets and hits a kid or whatever. Yeah. So, she raised.
Usually that's a mom comment. So
I
know.
It was you. Oh, dude, that's just how she was. She was going to raise boys to be boys. And so, this idea of, facing pain, this idea of running to the hard, it was not a one-time moment or just a spur of the moment thing. She lived this way. She wanted her kids to know that life's hard. There's things that are going to happen. We've got to jump in and face it. And then the people that we know are going to have hard things, and we want to be able to help them in the middle of the hard. Like, this was the norm. This was our everyday life. It was not unlikely for her to get a phone call or a text, and she's like, "I need to go help my friend." Okay, what is it? She's like, "Well, I'll tell you more about it later." And she'd come back and tell me a horrible story. Like, she didn't like shy away and say, "Hey, I've got a great counselor friend," or, "Hey, here's my pastor's phone number. Like, you probably ought to." No, she would just run right into it, and she'd come home and tell me these awful stories, and she was fearless about that stuff, about running into everybody else's heart. So in her mind, why would she not think that we would jump right into her hardest moments ever? Because that's what she's been doing all along. And so it wasn't, the lessons were being taught every day. It wasn't this last moment, but the fact that we got these 10 days and we got to see, in action, what a Christian should look like facing the worst and most awful news and things that you're ever going to face. Like, we got to see it firsthand, what a Christian should be like. So I saw a little reel on Francis Chan. It's funny, just the other day, and he was saying, like, we as Christians, we should be the calmest, most collected, peaceful. Like, we have the best news ever.
Amen.
We have the best future ever. We know where we're going. We know how this ends. And I was sitting there thinking, like, Michael got it. Like, she just got it. She understood. And then she understood that her being anxious or in fear only made our situation worse. And so she brought a calmness to the room that everybody noticed, the nurses, the doctors, her family. Like she made it better for all of us. Yeah. Pretty remarkable.
Man, what I find so compelling about this story, and obviously just the run to the heart concept, it's not like it's basically impossible to take somebody, give them a diagnosis like Michal had, and then for somebody to just like, okay, I'm just going to be strong about this. I'm just going to be faithful, if they haven't literally had so much evidence of doing that in the past, in
Right.
so many areas of their life.
Right.
And so as somebody's listening to this, let's just be real. There are people who are fearful, Curtis, who were taught fear.
Yeah.
Around every corner. It's like, oh, don't jump off that rock. Don't do this. Don't do that. So they grow up in fear. They grow up like anxiety is a normal thing, right? They're constantly anxious and, dare I say weak, right?
Yeah.
Spiritually, mentally, physically, all the things. But if you're listening to this and you can honestly say like, I might fall in that category. I think what Michal teaches us is that the way we live before death prepares us for death.
100%.
It gives us that blueprint for grief. But the most important thing that, I want to continue this conversation with is that, again, she had a hope, an eternal hope.
Yeah.
And we have an eternal hope to know that she's with Jesus.
Yeah.
And although the mystery of heaven does loom, we have that confidence, but man, she taught us so much with the way she lived prior to that. Yeah. And I can't wait to get into those stories because I've heard them, right? I've heard them. We talked about how you guys met and the vetting process, and oh dude, we'll get into it.
Oh, she was something. Yeah. She,
Whew.
Yep.
Yeah. So Curtis, you and I have talked, privately about this, and I just think it's really important to take us to the moment of, Michal passes away. You put your arms around her and you guys have a moment and nobody's there. And, as you're spending time with her, just soaking in whatever moments you can, there finally comes a point where the nurses are like, okay, we gotta pack up.
Yeah.
So just take us through those moments. That's
an interesting story too, because, I think I've shared in a previous episode where when the kids came in, because I had the kids coming, her parents were coming, and I told the kids to come in and grab an arm, grab a leg, hold a foot. I wanted them to experience this moment. This was the last time they were gonna get a chance to embrace their mom. Okay. And as weird as that might sound, but again, we just talked about preparing kids when we're alive, and she had done that. And I was trying to prepare them, but even in death, like, we're not going to fear this thing. Yeah. And I even remember saying the words, mom's not here. Like, this is just your body, but I do want you to have this moment, but I want you to see this moment and know that mom's gone. Like, she's in heaven. And then her parents came in, and I remember we all hung out in there for a while. Some of the aunts and uncles had come, the kids had left the room, and her parents and I, man, we had a moment. We're hanging out in there with Michal's body. Literally, I would say for an hour. As weird as that sounds, like we had some private moments, some conversations, some much needed conversations, some things that just needed to be said. We vented some stuff. Like, it was good. And we kept telling each other, it's amazing. There's a shell of a body there, but Michal's in heaven. Death is real. Like, there's no spirit. There's no soul. Like, it's gone, and you feel it, you know it. And you're like, okay. And I remember that during those moments, just kind of working that out in my mind, like, okay, that's just a body now. That's not Michal. Like, her essence, her being, her joy, her personality, like, oh my goodness. Like, it's gone. She's not here. So I remember working that out, and we sat there for a while, and finally the nurse comes in and says, guys, I'm really sorry, but there's some things that we have to do. You guys gotta go. And so, mom, dad, and I, we are like, okay. And so, man, I look around the room and there's just stuff. There's stuff everywhere. There's flowers, there's gifts, there's her clothes, her coat, her purse, her phone, that's been dinging off the hook for days. Her hair bows, her crunchies, her toothbrush that she'd make me brush her teeth every day, a couple times a day, because she couldn't do it. And, and so we're looking for bags. We're starting to pack things up. And, it was a moment, because it's like, man, this is it. Okay. We're taking everything home. And, she had her favorite water bottle. She had her little backpack, and I'm putting all these items in her backpack and, kind of carrying them out for the last time. And, so with death, there's all of these last times, these last things. The last time I'm going to walk in that room. It's the last time I'm going to comb her hair. It's the last time I'm going to brush her teeth. It's the last time I'm going to hold her. It's the last time I'm going to cut up her lemons for her lemon water that she drank every single day. And she wanted fresh lemons. I had to bring fresh lemons to the hospital every day, cut them up, and I'd squeeze them, and I'd give her fresh lemon water. Last time I'm going to feed her. So you asked the question, gathering things up. It wasn't just gathering things up. It was the last of 100 things.
Yeah.
People talk about the funeral kind of being this last mark, but for us, mom and dad and, the kids, that was the last. The funeral was just kind of a formality, That was the day that we walked out for the last time.
So take me to the funeral. You have the funeral. Michael asks you to preach the eulogy.
Yeah.
The story behind that.
Yeah, Wednesday, we'd have some moments during the day when there might not be somebody there. She says, hey, I'm like, what? She says, I want you to preach my funeral. I was like, what? She's like, you know me better than anybody. Now just think about that statement for a second. We've been married 2 years. We've known each other for 1.5 years, and we vetted each other hard. Man, we spent so much time, so many hours telling our story, diving in, digging in. And she's like, you know me better than anybody. I want you to tell my story. Yeah, that was, I remember getting home, and my kids had come and tried to help, around the house. And there was one day, because there's basically a week. She passed away on a Sunday. The funeral's on a Saturday. And so there's this whole week, you're getting a grave plot, or picking on a casket. You're doing all this stuff, which she didn't want any of it. She just wanted to be buried in a box. She didn't even want to be buried. She wanted me to cremate her. And I was like, no, we got to have a spot, And, I know the funeral home guy, and he kept asking me about all these things. And I looked at him like, dude, Michael, she wouldn't spend a dime on any of this stuff. He's like, yeah, you're right. So it was some interesting moments like that. But I remember having to, probably Wednesday or Thursday, I was like, I got to get this thing written. I've got to write this. Cause for me, if I speak in public, I write it all. I want to stay on track, stay on point. And so I locked myself in the office and just sat and wrote for, I don't know, a couple, 3 hours. And, I get done with it and it's terrible. I hate it. Like, there's not a funny story in it. There's not a single joke. There's none of that. And Michael would have been so mad. Like, she's so much fun. Like, she cracked jokes in the hospital nonstop. Some of them were even inappropriate. Like, she couldn't help but be fun. And so, she would crack jokes with the doctors, with the nurses. I was just going to tell you one. I was like, nope, I can't tell you that one.
I mean, you can, and then we can edit it out if we totally hate it. But
I'm like, oh my goodness! Like, she'd tease with the nurses, like, "Hey, pull the screen. I need a moment with my husband." She was just all the time cracking jokes, and that's just how she was. So I get done writing this whole thing out, and I'm like, this is terrible. Like, there's nothing funny in here. I don't tell, and so I told her dad, I told her dad, I was like, I had to rewrite the whole thing. I had to start over and be like, okay. And so, just kind of, I wanted to represent her well and have some funny moments and tell some good stories. And so I did it. And when you are in charge of the funeral, you have to write out all the details. And so, I've got the singers, and I've got several different pastors speaking at different points, because we had some really good pastor friends, and so when you write it all out, and then you've got to pick out the pictures. I didn't even talk about that. I mean, 25,000 pictures on her phone. What am I supposed to do with that? So I've got some of her family are going through, photo albums and putting together childhood pictures and things like that. And I'm going through her phone, and I'm trying to do my best to present my wife well. And you have this incredible burden of, I don't want to forget anything. I want to make sure it's perfect and this and that. And so perfectionism takes over, and it's that by itself can just crush you. And so, and then I'm meeting with my friend who's organizing the slides and the music and the video and this and that. And I didn't put any places in the whole service to stand up. Service was 2 hours long. And so I'm sitting there thinking, crap, 4 pastors have gotten up, a song person, and I haven't spoke yet, and we haven't stood and stretched yet. I literally had to point it all out, and nobody caught that? You know what I mean? So I'm a little bit mad too, like, somebody stand up. I almost felt like standing up in the middle of the church and being like, everybody stand up, because I'd missed it. I didn't say it in my little document.
That is awesome.
It gets time for me to speak, and I lean over to Ella and I said, Ella, I don't think my legs work. Like, we'd been sitting so long. And I'm feeling, physically, I'm a wreck. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff later. But physically, I'm like, I don't think I can stand up. And she's like, are you going to be okay? I was like, I don't know. Like, I literally had this terrible fear of I'm not going to be able to walk up to the platform. And so I remember standing, composing myself, like checking my feet, making sure they worked, And I don't know if anybody caught any of that. I have no idea.
No. I watched it live, but no, man.
If you knew how horrified I was that physically I wouldn't be able to get to the platform. And, anyways, God helped me, and we got through it. But you can't explain what grief just does to you mentally, physically. Like, it wrecks you. Anyways, we got through it. The Lord was good. It was helpful. Yeah.
So you mentioned that, you're trying your best to represent Michael well, to the point where you're gonna rewrite this thing to make sure it represents you well.
Yeah.
And now the funeral's over. We're at the graveside, and you made a bold, impulsive move. And I love it. So you gotta tell. Well,
before we even get to the graveside, let me just tell you what it's like having a whole bunch of kids and a family. Like,
sure.
I remember there was this huge rush where we've loaded the casket, we're getting in our cars, and people are like, where's this kid? Where's this kid? Have we forgotten this kid? And so now there's family running around the church, running through the parking lot, making sure that we haven't forgot a kid. I'll never forget that, because that was our life. That was like normal.
Lots of kids. Constantly counting with your eyes.
I drove off one time in the front yard, and I looked in the back seat of the truck, and I was like, where's Wesley? And they're like, why was Wesley supposed to go with us? I was like, yeah, where is he? I had to drive home. Wesley's playing baseball in the front yard by himself. Yeah, we just drove off without him. Like, so losing a kid was like a normal thing.
It's easy.
And so we're at the funeral. Why would it be no different, And so finally somebody's like, we found him. He's in so-and-so's car. He didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew where he was at. So we find a kid. there's humor in all of that because it's still life. It's life is still happening around you, so this is where, I've never done a funeral before. I had to plan a funeral, and I leaned over to my friend Wendell. I was like, oh, crap, we're going to the graveside. He's like, let me guess, you didn't ask somebody to speak.
Oh man.
He said,
oh my gosh.
He said, this is great. He said, I'm prepared just in case, because I was wondering if you forgot.
That's a good friend. That's a good friend.
By the way, this is the first time I've ever told that, so nobody knows this. This is the first time somebody's heard that we didn't have somebody prepared to speak at the graveside. So we did have Dad. Dad was going to read some scripture and he was going to say a prayer, but we didn't have anybody, making it happen. And at this point, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do it. But her mom and I, when we were at the funeral home, picking out a casket and things like that, I said to her, I can't remember who had the idea. I think she might have. Something like, we need to do something different. We've got all of these grandkids, all these siblings. Like, Michael loved kids. She loved having fun. Like, what can we do different? So her and I were sitting there brainstorming, and I was like, paint. Let's bring paint to the graveside. And she was like, that's a great idea. And then she's like, yeah, but parents would be so mad if we brought paint.
Oh
so I said, well, let's bring markers then. And she said, good idea. I'll bring the markers. You hand them out. I was like, done. So we get to the graveside. And I mean, again, you don't prepare. You don't know how all this is going to go. A ton of people came. I'm just going to throw a number out there. 250 people showed up to the graveside. There was cars and people everywhere. And I didn't expect that. I thought it would just be family members. I didn't realize a bunch of people would show up. And so Dad says a couple scriptures. Dad prays. Wendell says, well, folks, thank you so much for coming out. It's been a great day honoring Michael. At this point, we're going to be dismissed and we're going to go back to have a meal together. And you're all invited. And I raised my hand and I said, hold up, not yet. Like this is our moment. And I have this bag full of markers. And I said, okay, everybody. I said, you guys know how much Michael loved to have fun, and she loved kids. And we had kids in our house just all the time. And there were painting parties and baseball parties and soccer parties. I mean, we just always had kids doing stuff. I said, so all the cousins, we brought markers. Grammy and I, we brought markers because we want you to write, draw, color, trace your hands on the casket. And you could just hear the crowd gasp. No, they were horrified. Like you could feel this moment of like,
sure,
what? Yeah. And like eyes were this big around, and I didn't care. I was like, this is going to be a moment. And the kids were like, yay.
Oh, sure, dude.
That is so amazing. All these kids come up to me and we're handing out markers to all these kids, and they run over the casket and they're tracing their hands and they're drawing on it and writing on it. And I didn't want to like gawk at anybody, but I looked around and there were some horrified people. Like they couldn't believe what we were doing, But
they must not have known Michael well enough.
I think it's just this moment. Like, that's a casket. There's a, you know what I mean? Like,
sure,
cringe.
Oh, it's so good though.
And so after a few minutes, older cousins were like, I want in on this. And then siblings got in on it. And then aunts and uncles got in on it. And all of a sudden, there's just this mob around the casket, and they're handing pens or markers to each other. And everybody's writing a last minute note on the casket. And it was good because it took this solemn moment of like, nobody knew what to say. I hadn't even prepared a graveside message, nothing. And we just made it a celebration. And next thing I know, like cameras are out, videos are out, and people are walking around and videoing the casket and take pictures. And there was family portraits around the casket. Like that's weird in one way, but in this situation, we made it a celebration. We made it fun. Like this was Michael. Like this was all Michael. This would have been her to the T. Like, no. Like, I'm going to heaven. We're going to celebrate this, and we're going to celebrate it with kids. And so anyways, yeah, it was a good moment.
Dude, it's just so, like I said, and I don't really know that you've given yourself so much credit for this, but I see it. And I think a lot of people see it, is that, from the time she's in the hospital during these 10 days, even before that, we could see we could see your servant's heart for her,
Mm.
man. And even upon her passing away, like you being so intentional about honoring her legacy and honoring her, and with your incredible eulogy speech, which I watched, I was just like, my goodness, oh my gosh, it was just awesome. And then
Thanks.
making that bold move and bringing the markers and stuff, man. I mean, it's just it is so special. It's so unique. It's so her from all
Right.
the stories that you've told me about. So previously we were talking about the hope of heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and we were talking about the scriptures, and I thought as we end this episode it would be appropriate for us to read Jesus' description of heaven. And it says, "In my Father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself. That's where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." David Guzik had some really awesome commentary on this one time. I just love this line. It says, "Love prepares a welcome. With love, expectant parents prepare a room for the baby. With love, the hostess prepares for her guests. Jesus prepares a place for his people because he loves them and is confident of their arrival."
Yeah, that's good.
Man, so powerful, because we sit here on earth and we talk about this stuff. And like you said, death is real. It's undeniable. There's so much evidence for death, and it's real and it's tragic. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's awful. But the hope that we have as Christians, like I said, is that this place that Jesus is describing, like Michael is experiencing it in this moment right now.
Yep.
And Jesus is preparing the arrival for you and for me and for the body of believers.
Mm-hmm.
And we get that hope in the darkness of grief.
Yep.
Man. So in the next episode, Curtis, we're going to cover after the funeral, getting back to that, a new normal, if you could even call it that, and just go through the process and some of the unexpected things. And so,
sure.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.